The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red uniform jacket for the final time. After 27 years of dedicated service to the crown, today would be his last day as a member of the Queen's Guard. His weathered hands smoothed the golden buttons that had witnessed decades of royal ceremonies, state visits, and moments of both triumph and sorrow within the palace walls. Thomas had joined the Royal Guard as a young man of 22, fresh from military training and filled with dreams of serving his country with honor. He had stood motionless for countless hours outside the palace gates, weathered storms and scorching heat, and maintained his composure through tourist photographs and occasional disruptions. But, more importantly, he had earned the trust and respect of the royal family through his unwavering dedication and discretion. Over the years, Thomas had witnessed the monarchy evolve. He had served during Queen Elizabeth II's reign, watching as the family navigated personal scandals, public criticism, and changing times. He had been present during moments of joy, such as royal weddings and births, and had also stood guard during periods of mourning and uncertainty. Through it all, he had maintained his professional demeanor while developing a deep understanding of the individuals behind the royal titles. The palace corridors were quieter than usual this Tuesday morning. Most of the staff were preparing for the weekly schedule briefing, where duties and protocols would be discussed for the coming days. Thomas walked these familiar hallways one last time, his polished boots echoing against the ancient stones. He passed portraits of monarchs from centuries past, each one a reminder of the continuous legacy he had been privileged to protect. As he rounded the corner near the private quarters, Thomas encountered Sarah Peterson, one of the newer palace staff members who had been working as a lady-in-waiting for the past 3 years. Sarah had always been kind to the guards, often bringing them tea during long shifts and checking on their well-being during harsh weather conditions. Her genuine concern for others had made her popular among the staff, though she sometimes struggled with the more demanding aspects of royal protocol. "Thomas," Sarah called out softly, her voice carrying a note of concern. "I'm so glad I found you. I wanted to speak with you before your retirement ceremony this afternoon." Thomas paused, noting the worried expression on Sarah's face. In all his years of service, he had developed an ability to read people's emotions, a skill that had served him well in his position. Sarah's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by something that looked like distress, and her hands were trembling slightly as she clutched a folder of documents. "What's troubling you, Miss Peterson?" Thomas asked in his calm, measured voice. He had always made it a point to be approachable to the younger staff members, understanding that the palace environment could be overwhelming for newcomers. Sarah glanced around nervously, ensuring they were alone in the corridor. The palace walls seemed to have ears, and sensitive conversations required careful consideration of location and timing. She motioned for Thomas to follow her into a small alcove near a window overlooking the palace gardens, where they could speak more privately. "It's about Queen Camilla," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yesterday evening, she called me to her private study for what I thought would be a routine discussion about her upcoming engagements. But what she asked me to do..." Sarah's voice trailed off, and she seemed to struggle with finding the right words. Thomas remained silent, allowing Sarah the time she needed to gather her thoughts. His years of experience had taught him the importance of patience when someone was clearly distressed. He could see that whatever had transpired between Sarah and Queen Camilla had left a significant impact on the young woman. "She asked me to arrange a private meeting," Sarah continued, "but not just any meeting. She wants me to contact certain members of the press, specifically those who have been critical of the royal family in recent months. She claims she wants to set the record straight about some family matters, but the way she spoke about it, the things she hinted at sharing..." Sarah paused again, her eyes filling with tears. Thomas could see that she was genuinely torn between her loyalty to her position and her moral compass. The weight of whatever secret she was carrying was clearly affecting her deeply. "She wants me to arrange for her to share private conversations, personal family disputes, and confidential information about other members of the royal family," Sarah finally revealed. She spoke about Prince William and Catherine, about their private struggles and disagreements. She mentioned wanting to discuss King Charles's health concerns in detail, things that the public has no right to know. And She wants to reveal personal information about Prince Harry and Meghan's departure, information that could damage relationships further. Thomas felt his stomach tighten as he processed this information. Throughout his long career, he had always maintained strict confidentiality about anything he witnessed or overheard within the palace walls. The idea of a senior royal family member deliberately sharing private family information with the press went against everything he understood about royal duty and responsibility. She told me that if I don't arrange these meetings, she would ensure that my position here becomes untenable, Sarah continued, using air quotes. She made it clear that my future employment, not just here but anywhere in related positions, would depend on my cooperation with her plans. The morning light streaming through the window illuminated the tears that had begun to fall down Sarah's cheeks. Thomas reached into his pocket and offered her his handkerchief, a gesture that spoke to his gentle nature despite his imposing military bearing. I don't know what to do, Sarah admitted. I love working here, and I need this job to support my family. But what she's asking me to do feels so wrong. These are private family matters, and sharing them publicly would hurt so many people. It could damage the monarchy itself. Thomas understood the gravity of the situation. Throughout history, the royal family had faced various challenges and scandals, but most had been resolved through discreet handling and careful management. The idea of a family member deliberately seeking to expose private information to the media represented a new level of internal conflict. Have you spoken to anyone else about this? Thomas asked carefully. No, Sarah replied quickly. She specifically told me that this conversation should remain between us, and that any breach of confidence would result in immediate dismissal and legal action. I'm terrified, Thomas. I don't want to lose my job, but I also can't be part of something that feels so destructive. Thomas looked out at the palace gardens, where he had walked countless times during his years of service. The perfectly manicured lawns and ancient oak trees represented stability and continuity, values that seemed threatened by the situation Sarah had described. He thought about his own impending retirement and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Miss Peterson, he said finally, in my 27 years here, I have learned that sometimes the most difficult decisions are also the most important ones. The royal family, despite their titles and positions, are still human beings with the same emotions and vulnerabilities as anyone else. But they also carry a responsibility to their country and their subjects. Sarah listened intently as Thomas continued. What you're describing isn't just about family gossip or personal disagreements. It's about the foundation of trust that exists between the monarchy and the people. Once that trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to repair. The weight of Thomas's words seemed to resonate with Sarah. She had come to him hoping for guidance, and his perspective as someone who had dedicated his life to serving the crown carried significant meaning for her. But what can I do? She asked. I'm just a junior staff member. Who would believe me if I tried to report this? And even if they did, Queen Camilla is in a position of power. She could destroy my career with a single phone call. Thomas considered her words carefully. He knew that the palace hierarchy was complex and that challenging a senior royal family member required careful navigation. But he also knew that remaining silent in the face of potential harm to the institution he had served so faithfully would be equally problematic. There are proper channels for reporting concerns, he said slowly. The private secretary's office exists partly to handle sensitive situations like this. Sir Edward Harrison has been in that role for over a decade, and he's someone who understands the delicate balance between protecting individual family members and preserving the integrity of the monarchy. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. You think I should report this formally? I think you should consider all your options carefully, Thomas replied. But I also think you should ask yourself what kind of person you want to be and what kind of institution you want to serve. Sometimes protecting something we love requires making difficult choices. The sound of footsteps in the corridor interrupted their conversation. Both Thomas and Sarah quickly composed themselves, understanding the need for discretion even in their current discussion. A junior housekeeping staff member passed by, nodding respectfully to Thomas before continuing on her duties. After the footsteps faded, Sarah looked at Thomas with a mixture of gratitude and continued worry. Thank you for listening to me, she said. I know this isn't your responsibility, especially on your last day, But I didn't know who else I could trust. Thomas smiled gently. Miss Peterson, serving the crown has never been just about standing guard or following orders. It's about protecting something larger than ourselves. That responsibility doesn't end just because my official duties are concluding today. As they prepared to part ways, Sarah had one more question. Thomas, in all your years here, have you ever faced a situation like this? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his mind traveling back through decades of service. I've seen many challenges over the years, he said finally. Times when family members disagreed, when personal problems became public, when difficult decisions had to be made for the good of the institution. But what you're describing feels different. It feels deliberate in a way that concerns me deeply. Sarah nodded, understanding that Thomas's concerns validated her own instincts about the situation. The fact that someone with his experience found the situation troubling gave her confidence that her discomfort was justified. I should return to my duties, Sarah said. But thank you again for your counsel. Whatever I decide to do, I'll think carefully about what you've said. As Sarah walked away, Thomas remained in the alcove for a few more minutes, watching the morning activities in the palace gardens. Gardeners were tending to the flower beds, preparing them for the changing season. The sight reminded him of the continuous care required to maintain something beautiful and meaningful. He realized that his conversation with Sarah might be one of the most important of his entire career, even though it was taking place on his final day of service. The bells of nearby Westminster chimed the hour, reminding Thomas that his retirement ceremony was scheduled for later that afternoon. Members of his family would be in attendance, along with colleagues and supervisors who had worked with him over the years. It should have been a day of celebration and reflection on a career well served. But now, as he walked back toward his quarters to prepare for the ceremony, Thomas found himself thinking about the conversation with Sarah and the implications of Queen Camilla's request. He understood that his retirement didn't necessarily free him from the responsibilities he had carried for so many years. In fact, his experience and perspective might be needed now more than ever. The palace corridors seemed different to him now, charged with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there earlier in the morning. As he passed other staff members going about their daily duties, Thomas wondered how many of them were aware of the internal conflicts that were brewing within the royal family. The palace had always been a place where public duty and private emotions intersected, but this situation felt particularly volatile. Thomas reached his quarters and began preparing his dress uniform for the retirement ceremony. As he polished his medals and adjusted his ceremonial sword, he reflected on the oath he had taken 27 years earlier to serve the crown with honor and integrity. That oath, he realized, didn't come with an expiration date tied to his official employment. He thought about his conversation with Sarah and the difficult position she found herself in. Her distress had been genuine, and her moral conflict was understandable. Thomas knew that the coming hours and days would require careful consideration and perhaps difficult choices for both of them. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, and the palace was now fully alive with activity. Tours would begin soon, bringing visitors from around the world who came to witness the pageantry and tradition of the British monarchy. These visitors believed in the institution and its values, trusting that the royal family represented something stable and honorable in an often chaotic world. Thomas understood that their faith in the monarchy was part of what made Sarah's dilemma so significant. The institution was built on public trust, and that trust required constant protection and nurturing. What Queen Camilla was proposing threatened to undermine that foundation in ways that could have lasting consequences. As he prepared to leave his quarters for what might be his final official duty, Thomas made a mental note to check on Sarah later in the day. He wanted to ensure that she had the support she needed to navigate the difficult situation she faced. More importantly, he wanted to make sure that the right decision was made, not just for Sarah's career, but for the integrity of the institution they both served. The afternoon retirement ceremony proceeded with the formal dignity that Thomas had expected. Members of his family sat in the small chapel within the palace grounds, watching as he received recognition for his decades of faithful service. His wife Margaret wiped tears from her eyes as the commanding officer spoke about Thomas's exemplary record and unwavering dedication to duty. Their children, now adults with families of their own, beamed with pride as their father was honored for his service to the crown. But Even during this momentous personal occasion, Thomas found his thoughts drifting to his conversation with Sarah earlier that morning. The weight of her revelation about Queen Camilla's demands cast a shadow over what should have been a purely celebratory day. As he shook hands with colleagues and accepted their congratulations, Thomas's mind was working through the implications of the situation and considering what actions might be necessary. After the ceremony concluded and his family departed for a private celebration dinner, Thomas lingered in the palace corridors. Officially, his duties had ended, but he felt an obligation to follow up on the concerning situation Sarah had shared with him. The palace was transitioning into evening mode, with reduced staff and a quieter atmosphere that made private conversations more feasible. Thomas found Sarah in the staff quarters, sitting alone in the common room with a cup of tea that had clearly gone cold. She looked up when he entered, and he could see that the stress of the day had taken its toll on her. Her usually bright demeanor was replaced by visible exhaustion and worry. "How are you holding up, Miss Peterson?" Thomas asked, taking a seat across from her. "I keep thinking about what you said this morning," Sarah replied, "about asking myself what kind of person I want to be. I've been going over it in my mind all day, and I think I know what I need to do. But I'm still terrified of the consequences." Thomas nodded understandingly. Fear is natural when facing difficult decisions. But sometimes fear is an indicator that something important is at stake. "Tell me, have you had any further contact with Queen Camilla today?" Sarah's expression darkened. "She summoned me again this afternoon, just after your ceremony. She wanted to know if I had made the media contacts she requested. When I told her I was still considering the best approach, she became quite angry. She made it very clear that her patience was limited and that my continued employment depended on my immediate cooperation." The news troubled Thomas deeply. Queen Camilla's escalating pressure on Sarah suggested a level of determination that made the situation even more serious. It also indicated that whatever was motivating her actions was urgent in her mind, which could mean that the potential damage to the royal family was imminent. "She also mentioned something else," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She said that if I wasn't willing to help her, she would find other ways to get her story out. She implied that there were other staff members who might be more cooperative, and that she had already begun exploring those options." This revelation sent a chill through Thomas. The idea that Queen Camilla might be approaching multiple staff members to assist with her plans suggested a coordinated effort to undermine the royal family from within. It also meant that Sarah might not be the only person facing this ethical dilemma. "Did she mention any names?" Thomas asked. "No, but she did reference trusted associates who understood the importance of loyalty to her personally, as opposed to the institution as a whole." The way she phrased it made it sound like she was distinguishing between loyalty to her and loyalty to the broader royal family. Thomas found this particularly disturbing. Throughout his career, he had understood that loyalty to individual family members was always secondary to loyalty to the crown and the institution of monarchy. The idea that Queen Camilla was trying to create competing loyalties within the palace staff represented a fundamental threat to the unity and stability of the royal household. "Miss Peterson," Thomas said carefully, "I believe the time has come for you to speak with someone in authority about this situation. The escalation you're describing suggests that this won't resolve itself quietly, and the longer it continues, the more damage it could potentially cause." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of determination and fear. "I've been thinking the same thing. But who can I trust? How do I know that whoever I speak to won't just inform Queen Camilla about my concerns? She clearly has influence and connections throughout the palace." Thomas had been considering this same question throughout the day. The palace hierarchy was complex, with various competing interests and loyalties. However, there were certain positions that existed specifically to handle sensitive situations while maintaining discretion and objectivity. "I think our best option is Sir Edward Harrison, the private secretary," Thomas said. "In my experience, Sir Edward has always prioritized the welfare of the monarchy as an institution over the interests of any individual family member. He also has the authority to investigate sensitive matters and take appropriate action when necessary." Sarah considered this suggestion. "But what if he doesn't believe me? What if Queen Camilla denies everything, and I end up looking like a troublemaker who's trying to cause problems for the royal family?" "That's a risk," Thomas acknowledged. But consider the alternative. If Queen Camilla proceeds with her plans and confidential family information ends up in the press, the damage to the monarchy could be severe. At least by speaking up now, you're giving the institution a chance to address the problem before it becomes public. The weight of responsibility was clearly affecting Sarah. Thomas could see that she understood the significance of the decision she faced, and that she was struggling with the personal cost that might result from doing what she believed to be right. There's something else you should consider, Thomas added. Based on what you've told me about Queen Camilla's escalating demands and her references to other potential helpers, this situation is likely to become known to palace authorities eventually. If that happens, wouldn't you rather be seen as someone who tried to protect the institution rather than someone who remained silent? This perspective seemed to resonate with Sarah. She straightened in her chair, and Thomas could see a new resolve forming in her expression. You're right, she said. If I'm going to face consequences either way, I'd rather face them for trying to do the right thing. Thomas felt a sense of relief at her decision, but he also knew that the next steps would need to be carefully planned. Approaching the private secretary about such a sensitive matter required preparation and consideration of how to present the information in a way that would be taken seriously. When you speak with Sir Edward, Thomas advised, be sure to provide specific details about your conversations with Queen Camilla. Include dates, times, and as close to exact quotes as you can remember. The more specific information you can provide, the more credible your account will be. Sarah nodded, pulling out a small notebook from her pocket. I've actually been writing down details after each conversation. I wasn't sure why I was doing it at the time, but something told me it might be important to keep a record. Thomas smiled at this revelation. Sarah's instincts had served her well, and her documentation would provide valuable evidence of Queen Camilla's demands and threats. It would be much more difficult for anyone to dismiss her concerns if she had contemporary notes to support her account. That was very wise of you, Thomas said. Those notes could be crucial in helping Sir Edward understand the severity of the situation. As they continued to discuss the best approach for Sarah to take, Thomas became increasingly convinced that they were dealing with something that went beyond a simple family disagreement or momentary lapse in judgment. Queen Camilla's systematic approach to pressuring staff and her apparent preparation of alternative plans suggested a level of premeditation that was deeply concerning. Miss Peterson, Thomas said, I want to ask you something important. In your interactions with Queen Camilla, did you get the sense that she was acting alone, or might she have advisors or supporters who are encouraging this course of action? Sarah thought carefully before responding. She did mention at one point that people deserved to know the truth about the royal family, and that certain individuals had helped her understand that staying silent wasn't serving anyone's best interests. She didn't provide names, but she spoke as if she had been receiving advice or encouragement from others. This information added another layer of complexity to the situation. If Queen Camilla was being influenced by external advisors, it could mean that the threat to the royal family was part of a larger strategy or agenda. It also raised questions about whether those advisors might have their own motivations for wanting to damage the monarchy. Did she give any indication of who these advisors might be? Thomas asked. Not directly, but she did mention something about friends in the media who had assured her that the public would appreciate her honesty. She also referenced experts in public relations who had helped her understand the importance of controlling her own narrative. Thomas felt increasingly troubled by these revelations. The involvement of media contacts and public relations experts suggested that Queen Camilla's plans were more sophisticated than a simple desire to share family grievances. It sounded like there might be a coordinated media strategy involved, which could result in maximum damage to the royal family's reputation. Miss Peterson, I think it's important that you share all of these details with Sir Edward. The picture you're painting suggests that this isn't just about Queen Camilla's personal frustrations, but possibly about a deliberate campaign to undermine the monarchy. Sarah's eyes widened as she considered the implications of what Thomas was suggesting. You think this is bigger than just family drama? I think it's important to consider all possibilities, Thomas replied carefully. But, regardless of the motivations involved, the potential consequences for the institution are serious enough to warrant immediate attention from the highest levels of palace management. As the evening wore on, Thomas and Sarah continued to discuss the details of her upcoming meeting with Sir Edward. Thomas shared insights from his years of experience about how to navigate palace politics and present sensitive information effectively. He emphasized the importance of remaining calm and factual, and of focusing on her concern for the institution rather than any personal grievances. Remember, Thomas advised, you're not trying to get Queen Camilla in trouble. You're trying to protect the monarchy from potential damage. Frame your concerns in those terms, and Sir Edward will be more likely to take them seriously. Sarah appreciated this guidance. That's exactly how I feel about it. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I also can't stand by and watch something I believe in be damaged from within. As they prepared to end their conversation, Thomas felt a sense of responsibility that extended beyond his official duties. Even though his formal service to the crown had ended that afternoon, he realized that his commitment to protecting the institution continued. He also felt a personal obligation to support Sarah as she prepared to take what could be a career-defining stand. "Miss Peterson," he said, "I want you to know that I believe you're doing the right thing. It takes courage to speak up in situations like this, and the monarchy is fortunate to have staff members who are willing to put the institution's welfare ahead of their own comfort." Sarah smiled for the first time that day. "Thank you, Thomas. Having your support means more than you know. I just hope that when this is all over, the royal family will be stronger and that the public's trust in the monarchy will be preserved." As Thomas walked home that evening, he reflected on the strange turn his retirement day had taken. Instead of spending the evening celebrating his years of service, he had found himself counseling a young staff member through one of the most significant ethical challenges he had ever encountered. But rather than feeling frustrated by this development, Thomas felt a sense of purpose that reminded him why he had chosen to dedicate his life to serving the crown. The streets of London were quiet as he made his way home, but Thomas's mind was active with thoughts about the next day and the conversation Sarah would have with Sir Edward Harrison. He hoped that the private secretary would take her concerns seriously and that appropriate action would be taken to address Queen Camilla's plans before they could cause irreparable damage to the royal family. Thomas also found himself thinking about the broader implications of the situation. If Queen Camilla was indeed working with external advisors to damage the monarchy, it represented a new kind of threat that the institution would need to address. The traditional approaches to managing royal family disputes might not be sufficient to handle a coordinated media campaign designed to undermine public trust. As he reached his front door, Thomas made a decision that would have surprised him just 24 hours earlier. Despite his official retirement, he would remain available to help with this situation if his assistance was needed. His years of experience and his understanding of palace dynamics could be valuable resources as the institution worked to protect itself from internal threats. The next morning would bring new challenges and difficult decisions for everyone involved. But Thomas felt confident that by speaking up, Sarah was giving the monarchy the best possible chance to address the threat before it could cause lasting damage. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important service to the crown came not from following orders, but from having the courage to ask difficult questions when the institution's welfare was at stake. The following morning brought an unusual tension to Buckingham Palace. Sarah had spent a sleepless night rehearsing what she would say to Sir Edward Harrison, the private secretary, while Thomas found himself unable to fully embrace his newfound retirement as concerns about the developing situation continued to occupy his thoughts. Sarah arrived at the palace earlier than usual, her notebook of documented conversations tucked securely in her briefcase. She had followed Thomas's advice about being thorough and factual, and she felt as prepared as possible for the difficult conversation ahead. However, as she made her way through the familiar corridors, she noticed an unusual level of activity among the senior staff. Unknown to Sarah, Sir Edward Harrison was already dealing with a related crisis that had developed overnight. He had received an early morning phone call from James Crawford, a respected journalist at the Times, who claimed to have been approached by a representative of Queen Camilla about providing exclusive interviews regarding internal royal family matters. The journalist, who had covered the royal family for over 15 years, was troubled enough by the approach to contact the palace directly rather than pursuing what could have been a career-defining story. Sir Edward had immediately recognized the potential catastrophe that such interviews could create. His decades of experience managing royal communications had taught him that the most damaging stories were often those that came from within the royal household itself. External criticism could be managed and countered, but revelations from family members carried a credibility that could permanently damage public trust in the monarchy. When Sarah's request for an urgent meeting arrived at his office that morning, Sir Edward initially assumed it was related to routine administrative matters. However, his assistant mentioned that Miss Peterson had specifically indicated the meeting concerned sensitive information about royal family members, which immediately captured his attention given the overnight developments. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in Sir Edward's private office, a wood-paneled room that had served as the nerve center for royal crisis management for generations. Sarah arrived precisely on time, carrying herself with a composure that masked her internal nervousness. Sir Edward, a distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, greeted her with the formal courtesy that characterized all palace interactions. "Miss Peterson," Sir Edward began, "I understand you have some concerns you wish to discuss. Please, have a seat, and tell me what's troubling you." Sarah took a deep breath and began her account, starting with Queen Camilla's initial request for her to arrange media meetings. She provided specific dates and times, reading directly from her notes to ensure accuracy. As she spoke, Sir Edward's expression grew increasingly grave, particularly when she described the threats to her employment and the mention of trusted associates who might assist with the media campaign. "Miss Peterson," Sir Edward interrupted gently, "I need you to be very specific about Queen Camilla's mention of media contacts. Did she provide any names or publications?" Sarah consulted her notes. She specifically mentioned wanting to speak with journalists who had been critical but fair in their coverage of the royal family. She said she wanted to reach people who would appreciate her honesty and wouldn't simply dismiss her concerns as palace gossip. Sir Edward made careful notes as Sarah continued her account. When she mentioned Queen Camilla's references to external advisors and public relations experts, he paused and looked up from his writing. "Miss Peterson, this information you're sharing aligns with some concerns that have already come to my attention through other channels. I want to assure you that by bringing this matter to my attention, you have done exactly the right thing. The potential consequences of the situation you're describing could be extremely serious for the monarchy." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication at Sir Edward's response. Her fears that she might not be taken seriously or that she might be seen as a troublemaker were clearly unfounded. The private secretary's grave demeanor confirmed that her concerns were justified and that the situation was indeed as serious as she had believed. "Sir Edward," Sarah said, "there's one more thing I should mention. Yesterday evening, Queen Camilla contacted me again and indicated that if I wasn't willing to help her, she would find other ways to proceed with her plans. She suggested that she had already begun exploring alternative options for getting her story out." This information clearly alarmed Sir Edward. Did she provide any specifics about these alternative options? No, but her tone suggested that she had backup plans in place. She seemed confident that one way or another, her version of events would become public knowledge. Sir Edward set down his pen and looked directly at Sarah. "Miss Peterson, what I'm about to tell you must remain strictly confidential. Early this morning, I received a call from a journalist at the Times who claimed to have been approached by someone representing Queen Camilla about conducting interviews regarding private royal family matters. The journalist was professional enough to contact us directly rather than pursuing the story, but his call confirms that Queen Camilla has indeed moved beyond planning and has begun taking concrete steps to implement her media strategy." Sarah felt her heart sink as she processed this information. The situation had clearly escalated beyond what she had imagined, and the threat to the royal family was no longer theoretical but immediate and real. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Sir Edward replied, "we must take swift but careful action to prevent a crisis that could seriously damage the monarchy's relationship with the British people. This type of internal family conflict, if it becomes public in the way Queen Camilla apparently envisions, could undermine decades of work to maintain public confidence in the royal family." Sir Edward explained that he would need to brief King Charles immediately about the developing situation. As the monarch, the king would need to be fully informed about his wife's apparent plans, and would ultimately be responsible for deciding how to address the crisis within the family. Miss Peterson, I want to emphasize that your decision to come forward has likely prevented a disaster for the royal family. If Queen Camilla had proceeded with her plans without our knowledge, the damage could have been irreversible. By giving us advance warning, you've provided an opportunity to address the situation before it becomes public. Sarah appreciated Sir Edward's reassurance, but she was still concerned about her own position. Sir Edward, what about my employment? Queen Camilla made it very clear that my refusal to cooperate would result in my dismissal. Miss Peterson, you have my personal assurance that your employment is secure. Moreover, your actions in this matter demonstrate exactly the kind of judgment and integrity that the royal household values in its staff. Rather than facing negative consequences, you should be commended for your courage and loyalty to the institution. As their meeting concluded, Sir Edward outlined the next steps that would need to be taken. He would immediately brief the king about Queen Camilla's plans and the approaches that had been made to journalists. He would also work with the palace's legal team to explore options for preventing any confidential information from being published if Queen Camilla proceeded with her media campaign despite family intervention. Miss Peterson, Sir Edward said as she prepared to leave, I may need to speak with you again as this situation develops. I hope you'll remain available to provide additional information if necessary. Sarah assured him of her continued cooperation and left the meeting feeling that she had done the right thing, despite the personal risks involved. As she returned to her duties, she couldn't help but wonder how Queen Camilla would react when she learned that her plans had been discovered and reported to the palace authorities. Meanwhile, Thomas Mitchell was spending his first full day of retirement in a state of anxious anticipation. He had agreed to meet Sarah for lunch to hear about her meeting with Sir Edward, and he found himself checking the clock frequently as the morning progressed. His wife Margaret had planned a relaxing day of gardening and reading, but Thomas was unable to focus on retirement activities while the palace crisis remained unresolved. When lunchtime arrived, Thomas met Sarah at a quiet cafe near the palace where they could speak privately about the developments. Sarah's relief was visible as she described Sir Edward's supportive response and his confirmation that her concerns were justified. He told me that a journalist had already been contacted by someone representing Queen Camilla, Sarah explained. So everything I reported was accurate, and the situation is even more serious than I realized. Thomas nodded grimly. That explains why Sir Edward took your concerns so seriously. The fact that external contacts have already been made means this isn't just a family disagreement anymore. It's become a potential public relations crisis. Sarah described Sir Edward's plans to brief King Charles immediately and his assurances about her job security. Thomas was pleased to hear that the palace leadership was taking appropriate action, but he remained concerned about the broader implications of the situation. Miss Peterson, Thomas said, I think you should be prepared for the possibility that this situation may become more complicated before it's resolved. If Queen Camilla has been working with external advisors, as you mentioned, they may not be easily deterred by family pressure or palace intervention. Sarah had been thinking along similar lines. I'm worried that if she's blocked from pursuing her original plans, she might try to find other ways to get her story out. She seemed very determined yesterday, and I don't think she'll give up easily. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with an urgent text message. As she read it, her expression changed from concern to alarm. It's from Queen Camilla, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wants to see me immediately in her private study. She says it's about our previous discussions and that it's urgent. Thomas felt a chill of apprehension. The timing of this summons, coming just hours after Sarah's meeting with Sir Edward, was deeply concerning. It suggested that Queen Camilla might have learned about Sarah's report to the palace authorities, which could put Sarah in a very difficult and potentially dangerous position. Miss Peterson, Thomas said firmly, I don't think you should go to that meeting alone. Given what you've told Sir Edward, and given the escalating nature of this situation, I think it would be wise to have a witness present. Sarah looked uncertain. But how can I refuse a direct summons from Queen Camilla? And who could serve as a witness without making the situation even more confrontational? Thomas considered the options quickly. I think you should contact Sir Edward immediately and inform him about this summons. Given the sensitive nature of the ongoing situation, He may want to ensure that any further interactions between you and Queen Camilla are properly documented. Sarah agreed this was the wisest course of action. She immediately called Sir Edward's office and explained the situation to his assistant. Within minutes, Sir Edward himself called back with instructions for how to handle the meeting. Sir Edward wants me to go to the meeting, Sarah explained to Thomas, but he's arranging for another senior staff member to be present as well. He said that given the circumstances, it's important to have an independent witness to any conversations between Queen Camilla and staff members. Thomas felt somewhat relieved by this development. Sir Edward was clearly taking the situation seriously and was implementing appropriate safeguards to protect both Sarah and the palace's interests. As Sarah prepared to return to the palace for what promised to be a difficult confrontation, Thomas made an unexpected decision. Despite his official retirement, he felt a continuing obligation to help resolve the crisis that threatened the institution he had served for so many years. "Miss Peterson," he said, "I know I'm no longer officially employed by the palace, but I want you to know that I'm available if my assistance is needed in any way. This situation goes beyond normal palace politics, and I believe everyone who cares about the monarchy has a responsibility to help protect it from internal threats." Sarah was touched by Thomas's continued commitment. "Thank you, Thomas. Knowing that you're still willing to help gives me strength to face whatever happens next." As they parted ways, both Sarah and Thomas understood that the next few hours would likely determine whether Queen Camilla's plans could be stopped before they caused irreparable damage to the royal family. The stakes were enormous, and the outcome would affect not just the individuals involved, but the future of the monarchy itself. The confrontation in Queen Camilla's private study was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced during her time at the palace. She arrived at the appointed time accompanied by Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, a senior lady-in-waiting who had served the royal family for over 20 years and whom Sir Edward had chosen to serve as an independent witness to the conversation. Queen Camilla was waiting for them in her elegantly appointed study, surrounded by personal photographs and official documents. Her demeanor was markedly different from their previous interactions. There was an edge of anger and betrayal in her voice that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Miss Peterson," Queen Camilla began without preamble, "I understand you've been having conversations about private family matters with people who have no business knowing about them. I'm extremely disappointed in your disloyalty, and I want to understand exactly what you think you're accomplishing." Sarah glanced at Mrs. Hartwell, who nodded encouragingly before responding. "Your Majesty, I felt obligated to report my concerns about the request you made of me. I believe that sharing private family information with the media would be harmful to the monarchy as an institution." Queen Camilla's expression hardened. "And who are you to decide what's harmful to the monarchy? I am a senior member of this family, and I have every right to tell my own story, especially when that story involves correcting false narratives and defending myself against unfair treatment." The reference to unfair treatment intrigued both Sarah and Mrs. Hartwell. It suggested that Queen Camilla's motivations were more complex than simple vindictiveness, and that she felt genuinely aggrieved by some aspect of her treatment within the royal family. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Hartwell interjected gently, "perhaps you could help us understand your concerns. If there are issues within the family that are causing you distress, there may be more appropriate ways to address them than through media interviews." Queen Camilla turned her attention to Mrs. Hartwell, clearly annoyed by the older woman's presence at what she had intended to be a private conversation with Sarah. "Mrs. Hartwell, with respect, you've been part of this system for decades. You've seen how family members who don't fit the perfect image are marginalized and silenced. You've watched as certain individuals are protected while others are thrown to the wolves when it's convenient." The pain in Queen Camilla's voice was genuine, and both women could see that her frustrations ran deeper than simple family disagreements. She was clearly carrying resentment about her treatment by both the media and potentially by other family members over many years. "I've watched Prince William and Catherine be presented as the perfect royal couple, while every mistake I've ever made is magnified and criticized," Queen Camilla continued. "I've seen the king's health concerns kept private, while rumors about my influence on him are allowed to circulate unchallenged. I've been patient and supportive, but I won't be silenced indefinitely." Sarah began to understand that Queen Camilla's plans weren't simply about causing trouble for the family, but about defending her own reputation and legacy. However, she also recognized that the potential damage to the monarchy remained the same regardless of the motivations involved. "Your Majesty," Sarah said carefully, "I understand your frustrations, but sharing private family information publicly could harm the very institution you've spent years serving. Isn't there a way to address your concerns that doesn't risk damaging public confidence in the royal family?" Queen Camilla laughed bitterly. "Public confidence? Miss Peterson, the public already questions my legitimacy and my role in this family. At least if I tell my own story, I can ensure that the truth is presented accurately rather than allowing others to control the narrative." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the study door. Sir Edward Harrison entered, followed by an unexpected figure. Thomas Mitchell, still wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with the same dignity and authority he had possessed during his years of service. "Your Majesty," Sir Edward said formally, "I apologize for the interruption, but there are urgent matters we need to discuss regarding the situation that has developed." Queen Camilla's eyes narrowed as she recognized Thomas. "Mr. Mitchell, you're retired now. This conversation doesn't concern you." Thomas stepped forward respectfully, but firmly. "Your Majesty, with respect, this situation concerns everyone who cares about the welfare of the monarchy. I have a question that I believe needs to be asked, and I hope you'll permit me to ask it." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Thomas to continue. His presence had introduced a new dynamic to the confrontation, and his years of respected service gave him a moral authority that even Queen Camilla couldn't easily dismiss. "Your Majesty," Thomas said, "in my 27 years of service to the crown, I learned that the monarchy's strength comes not from the perfection of its individual members, but from the institution's ability to serve something larger than any one person's interests. My question is this: if you proceed with your plans to share private family information publicly, how do you believe that serves the institution you've sworn to support?" The directness of Thomas's question caught Queen Camilla off guard. She had clearly expected continued attempts at persuasion or negotiation, not a fundamental challenge to the reasoning behind her actions. "Mr. Mitchell," she replied after a long pause, "sometimes serving the institution requires correcting false impressions and ensuring that all voices within the family are heard. I'm not trying to destroy the monarchy. I'm trying to save my place within it." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your desire to protect your reputation, Your Majesty, but may I suggest that there might be more effective ways to accomplish that goal? Ways that strengthen the monarchy rather than potentially undermining it." Sir Edward recognized the opportunity that Thomas's intervention had created. "Your Majesty, perhaps we could explore some alternatives to media interviews that would address your concerns while protecting the institution's interests." For the first time since the conversation began, Queen Camilla seemed genuinely open to hearing suggestions rather than simply defending her position. The combination of Thomas's moral authority and Sir Edward's practical expertise had created a space for meaningful dialogue. "What alternatives?" she asked. Sir Edward had come prepared for this possibility. "We could arrange for you to work with our communications team to develop a more proactive media strategy that presents your contributions to the royal family in a positive light. We could also explore opportunities for you to take on higher-profile charitable roles that would showcase your dedication to public service." Thomas added his perspective. "Your Majesty, in my experience, the public respects royal family members who demonstrate grace under pressure and who prioritize their duty over their personal grievances. By working within the system rather than against it, you could actually strengthen your position and your legacy." Queen Camilla considered these suggestions carefully. The anger and frustration that had dominated her demeanor began to give way to something more reflective. She looked around the room at the faces of people who, despite their disagreement with her methods, were clearly trying to help her find a better path forward. "And what about the external advisors who have been encouraging me to tell my story?" she asked. "They've assured me that the public deserves to know the truth about royal family dynamics." This question revealed something that Sir Edward had suspected but hadn't been able to confirm. "Your Majesty, may I ask who these advisors are? It might be helpful to understand their motivations and whether their interests align with yours and the royal family's." Queen Camilla hesitated, clearly reluctant to reveal information about her outside consultants. They're public relations professionals who specialize in reputation management. They've worked with other public figures who felt their stories weren't being told accurately. Thomas and Sir Edward exchanged glances, both recognizing the potential problem this represented. External advisors who specialized in controversial revelations might have financial incentives to encourage damaging disclosures rather than seeking constructive solutions. Your Majesty, Thomas said gently, I wonder if these advisors fully understand the unique nature of royal service and the long-term consequences that public family conflicts can have for the monarchy. Their advice might be suitable for private individuals, but the royal family operates under different constraints and responsibilities. Sir Edward reinforced this point. Your Majesty, we have extensive experience managing royal communications and protecting both individual family members and the institution as a whole. Our recommendations are based on decades of understanding how these situations can best be resolved. Queen Camilla was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the different perspectives she was hearing. The external advisors had promised her vindication and public sympathy, while the palace staff were offering a more measured approach that prioritized institutional stability. Finally, she looked directly at Sarah, who had remained largely silent during the latter part of the conversation. Miss Peterson, you risked your career to report my plans to the palace authorities. Do you really believe that my telling my story would be so damaging to the monarchy? Sarah had been dreading this direct question, but she answered honestly. Your Majesty, I believe that public conflicts between family members damage the monarchy's image as a source of stability and unity. I also believe that once private information becomes public, it's impossible to control how it's interpreted or used by others. Queen Camilla nodded slowly, as if Sarah's honest assessment had confirmed something she had been reluctant to acknowledge. And you, Mr. Mitchell? After 27 years of service, what would you do in my position? Thomas considered his response carefully. Your Majesty, if I felt my contributions weren't being properly recognized, I would work with the palace communications team to find positive ways to highlight my service. I would focus on building a legacy based on my actions and dedication rather than on conflicts with other family members. The wisdom in Thomas's response seemed to resonate with Queen Camilla. She had spent years building a role for herself within the royal family, and the idea of potentially undermining all of that work for the sake of temporary vindication was beginning to seem less appealing. Sir Edward, she said finally, if I were to work with the palace communications team instead of pursuing media interviews, what assurances do I have that my concerns would be taken seriously and addressed effectively? Sir Edward was ready with a concrete proposal. Your Majesty, I would personally oversee the development of a comprehensive communication strategy designed to highlight your contributions to the royal family and your charitable work. We would also establish regular meetings between you and the communications team to ensure that your perspective is considered in all public relations decisions affecting the royal family. Queen Camilla looked around the room one final time, taking in the faces of people who had moved from being adversaries to potential allies in finding a constructive solution to her frustrations. Very well, she said. I'll contact my external advisors and inform them that I've decided not to pursue media interviews at this time. But I want regular updates on the communication strategy, and I want to be involved in its development. The relief in the room was palpable. Sarah felt as though an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders, while Thomas experienced a deep satisfaction at having helped protect the institution he had served for so many years. Sir Edward outlined the next steps for implementing the new communication strategy, while Mrs. Hartwell offered to help coordinate Queen Camilla's involvement in the process. As the meeting concluded, Queen Camilla turned to Sarah with an expression that was no longer hostile. Miss Peterson, she said, I want you to understand that I don't appreciate having my private conversations reported to the palace authorities. However, I can see that you acted out of loyalty to the institution rather than personal animosity toward me. I hope we can work together more constructively in the future. Sarah accepted this olive branch gracefully. Thank you, Your Majesty. I look forward to supporting whatever communication strategy is developed. As everyone prepared to leave the study, Queen Camilla had one final request for Thomas. Mr. Mitchell, despite your retirement, would you be willing to serve as an advisor on this communication strategy? Your perspective as someone who has served the crown for so many years could be valuable." Thomas was surprised but honored by the request. "Your Majesty, if my experience can be helpful in strengthening the monarchy, I would be happy to provide whatever assistance I can." As they left Queen Camilla's study, the crisis that had threatened to engulf the royal family had been transformed into an opportunity for better communication and understanding. Sarah's courage in reporting her concerns, Thomas's moral authority, and Sir Edward's diplomatic skills had combined to prevent what could have been a devastating blow to the monarchy's reputation. In the days that followed, the palace communications team worked closely with Queen Camilla to develop a strategy that highlighted her charitable work and her contributions to the royal family. The external advisors who had been encouraging her to pursue damaging revelations were quietly informed that their services were no longer needed. Thomas found that his retirement had taken an unexpected turn as he became involved in helping to implement the new communications approach. His years of understanding palace dynamics and his reputation for integrity made him a valuable advisor in ensuring that the strategy served both Queen Camilla's interests and the monarchy's broader needs. Sarah continued her duties with a new appreciation for the complex challenges faced by royal family members and the importance of finding constructive ways to address internal conflicts. Her experience had taught her that sometimes the most important service to an institution comes from having the courage to speak up when something threatens its welfare. The crisis had been averted, but, more importantly, it had led to improvements in how the royal family managed internal communications and addressed the legitimate concerns of its members. The monarchy emerged stronger and more unified, demonstrating that even serious internal conflicts could be resolved when all parties prioritized the institution's welfare over personal grievances. Thomas's simple question, how Queen Camilla's actions would serve the institution she had sworn to support, had cut through the complexity of the situation and helped everyone involved focus on what really mattered. Sometimes, the most profound solutions came from asking the most basic questions about duty, service, and the greater good.